For more on this, let's turn to former Florida Republican Congressman and Florida Attorney General Bill McCollum. He also served as an impeachment manager during the Clinton impeachment. So as somebody who has been on the Senate floor during an impeachment trial, how do you think the president's legal team did yesterday, and what are you looking for tomorrow?
Well, I think the president's team did fine yesterday. They didn't speak too long. They were doing what they said out a little summary of what they're going to do. I think it's important for them to be concise, but I also think it's important, I think they will tomorrow, lay out the case for the president, lay out the facts that are there. It's very clear to me what my former colleagues, 21 present state attorneys generals wrote recently to the Senate in saying, look, there are no crimes here. There is only a question of an allegation of corrupt motives about being political in a foreign policy matter. And that would mean if you had that as precedent and removed a president for that, you could remove or have impeachments of almost every president all the time. It's not a good case, and they need to show why it's not, and I believe they will.
One thing that was really interesting about yesterday was that the president's defense attorneys did not mention really go into the Bidens, the former Vice President Joe Biden or his son Hunter Biden. Do you think we're going to hear more about them tomorrow?
I think you probably will hear some about them in the background of why this was important to the president in the first place. Corruption is the issue in Ukraine. His interest in holding back that aid, I personally think, was broader than simply the Bidens. He happened to mention them, but he talked about us rather than himself in asking for the so-called favor from the president of Ukraine. The arms and the weapons and so on were there in just as timely a manner as they would have been, no matter the fact he had a hold up. The Ukrainian government did not appear to be aware of the hold at all until maybe 2 or 3 days before they received those arms and it was released. So I think that the president was looking at a broader issue of corruption in Ukraine, which historically has been there. Burisma was the heart of that. An oligarch that controlled Burisma and still does was one of the worst of all back in a previous administration in Ukraine. And all of that was taking place in the background of the 2016 election. So while the Russians may have interfered with our elections, the Ukrainians were not hands off. They were supportive of Mrs. Clinton. And I think it's a very something that's very important that will be brought out in context, but not dwelled on by the defense team tomorrow.
Democrats continue to want new witnesses to kind of push back on some of those points. And, that really has been the big question last week and continues to be this week is, will new witnesses be allowed? And you were quoted in a Florida paper as saying that I think Republicans are making a mistake if they don't allow some witnesses because of the fairness. Do you still stand by that? You think that Republicans should allow new witnesses?
Well, I've been a little bit ambivalent about witnesses over time. First of all, I want to say I don't think the president committed an offense that is impeachable. I never have thought so. I believe if I were there going to vote on this, I wouldn't need to hear from witnesses to make my decision to acquit him. But I do think politically, from a standpoint of just appearances, most of the people aren't watching this. They're not paying attention like those of us, you and I are. And it seems to me that their sense of fairness would say there ought to be witnesses. They don't know better than that. We don't have to have them. And it may be because of the difficulty of bringing witnesses in this case, the ones they particularly want to bring, like Mick Mulvaney and John Bolton. They have executive privilege issues without question. Those are the top 2 spots in around the president who would be protected, probably by the courts.
But
the
really
Bidens.
Quick,
so I think it's going to be very difficult to come up with witnesses that would be appropriate. But I have said, and I will say again, I think it would be best if there could be 2 witnesses or so aside, just from the standpoint of the politics of this.
All right. Well, we'll have to wait and see. It would certainly make next week a lot more interesting than it already is. Bill McCollum, thank you so much for your time.